America has been at war from the moment those planes hit 13 years ago, and last night a new chapter. President Obama presents his strategy to destroy the terror group ISIS in a primetime address to the nation. ABC's John Carl starts off our team coverage from the White House. Good morning, John.
Good morning, George. The president is prepared for a significant escalation of U.S. military operations against the terrorist group ISIS, including more troops going to the region and more airstrikes in Iraq and in Syria.
The president used his primetime address to tell the American public he does have a plan for taking on what many in his administration call the greatest terrorist threat since 9/11.
America will lead a broad coalition to roll back this terrorist threat. This is a core principle of my presidency. If you threaten America, you will find no safe haven. Our objective is clear. We will degrade and ultimately destroy ISIL.
His plan includes sending an additional 475 U.S. troops to Iraq to train and advise Iraqi security forces that are battling ISIS, training moderate Syrian rebels battling ISIS in Syria, and expanding U.S. airstrikes in Iraq, eventually including airstrikes in Syria, too. The president also reiterated what he won't do: no U.S. combat troops.
As I've said before, these American forces will not have a combat mission. We will not get dragged into another ground war in Iraq.
But the number of U.S. troops in Iraq, advising Iraqis and providing security to American diplomats, has been steadily rising. There will soon be a total of more than 1,600 U.S. troops serving in Iraq.
The president said that he would welcome a show of support from Congress, but that he does not need authority from Congress to conduct airstrikes in Iraq or in Syria. But, George, there is one thing he does need from Congress. He needs them to vote to give him authority to train those so-called moderate rebels in Syria.
And that could come as early as next week. Okay, John, thanks. Let's get more on the president's strategy now from ABC's Martha Raddatz, also in Washington. And Martha, as John pointed out, very, very clear that airstrikes are coming in Syria. What exactly would trigger that escalation?
George, if they find an ISIS leader or the executioners of James Foley or Steven Sotloff, I think you would see an airstrike immediately in Syria. But for the larger campaign into Syria, it will be when they have solid targets based on surveillance and intelligence, and that will probably be a while. In the meantime, the airstrikes, as John said, will expand in Iraq. But to give a little perspective, so far in a month, a little over 150 airstrikes in Iraq. Back in Desert Storm, there were about 2,000 sorties a day.
And Martha, after some conflicting early messages, now the president has now repeated several times the goal is to defeat ISIS. But what would that look like?
In Iraq, it would mean removing ISIS as a threat and having a stable, inclusive government. In Syria, a much tougher end state, because even if you defeated ISIS there, you would still end up with an unstable government with Assad in charge and a country that has become a magnet for Islamic extremists. Either way, this is going to take a very long time, George.
Beyond the Obama presidency. Okay, Martha, thanks very much. And on this 9/11 anniversary, there is heightened concern about a terrorist attack in the U.S. ABC's Pierre Thomas is in Washington with more on that front. Good morning, Pierre.
Good morning, George. On this day of 9/11, the country is facing a multitude of threats, a witch's brew. You have bomb makers from Yemen converging with al-Qaeda fighters in Syria, trying to make explosives that can be smuggled onto planes. You have the possibility of lone wolves, not tied to any group, who could attack at any time. And of course, there's this new emerging threat from ISIS. New York City's police commissioner says this is the most dangerous moment in recent years, and he cited ISIS as a major reason, George.
But Pierre, on that ISIS threat, both the president and his advisors up on Capitol Hill yesterday have made it very clear there is no specific credible threat from ISIS to the homeland right now.
No specific threat has been identified, but they know at least 100 Americans have gone to Syria or tried to go. They're dealing with that. And because ISIS is so good at using social media to lure people to their cause, there's growing concern that ISIS could convince people here at home to attack.